Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thank you for joining me again for another Tuesday devotional. This week we are still reading from Every Step, a Prayer, Walking as Spiritual Practice, and this week we begin chapter 2. It is a moment every parent anticipates. When toddlers take their first steps, parents exhibit understandable excitement. The excitement fades quickly, however. Those first steps soon cease to be childhood's supreme achievement. They instead become just another memory tucked away in a baby book. Once they discover their feet, toddlers are immediately given wheels, tricycles, big wheels, and cozy coupes. Parents have many reasons to be excited when toddlers learn to walk. Walking upright, a uniquely human experience, distinguishes us from almost every other mammal. Kangaroos are also bipeds, but they do not walk, they hop. Birds walk or run on two legs, but they have tails to balance themselves. The nearest species, the great apes, can briefly waddle along on 2 feet, but that is not their preferred or most efficient means of locomotion. Human beings, on the other hand, are true bipeds. Our physical frame is designed for walking upright on 2 feet. We are not made for sitting or standing. Our spine is not straight, but jointed and doubly curved. Its shape propels us forward. Our hips are also part of our design for walking on 2 feet. Flexible ball and socket joints provide mobility and fluid movement of hips and legs. With each stride, our legs swing freely in those sockets, so that as we walk, our weight shifts smoothly from one side of the body to the other. The primary function of more than half our muscles is to help us walk. The muscles in our feet, legs, hips, and backs contract and release with every step we take. Striding forward, we throw our arms and shoulders back and forth to balance our bodies. Walking also plays an important role in supporting our circulatory system. Our arteries have muscles that contract and release to pump blood throughout the body. Veins, on the other hand, lack similar muscles. Above the waist, veins rely on the pressure of arterial flow and gravity to move blood to the heart. Below the waist, they depend on the contraction and release of the muscles in our feet, calves, and thighs, and abdomen, together with the diaphragm to move blood to the heart. As we walk, our leg muscles literally milk the blood back to the heart. In a certain sense, walking serves as our second heart. We can trace many of our modern health problems to the sedentary lifestyle we impose on physical bodies made for walking. Studies have linked extended periods of sitting to increased likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, all of which lead to an elevated risk of premature death. A friend of mine suggested that instead of delivering bad news with the expression, "Are you sitting down?" we should instead say, "Are you standing up?" The psalmist exclaims, "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them." We are truly fearfully and wonderfully made to walk. Everything about the human body is made for walking. The effects of human locomotion do not stop with our physical makeup, however. They also extend to our mental and emotional capacities. Scientists increasingly believe that our ability to walk upright emerged before the human brain developed into its current shape and size. So walking has shaped human consciousness itself. The area of the brain most closely related to motor control is the cerebellum, located at the back of the brain and about the size of a small fist. While the cerebellum constitutes only 1/10 of the brain's volume, it contains nearly half of the brain's neurons. The cerebellum manages neural communications about motor movement. It also has massive connections into all other regions of the brain, including those areas that influence thought, memory, attention, and spatial perception. Some 40 million nerve fibers feed information back and forth between the cerebellum and the neocortex, our thinking brain. Why is this significant? In the cerebellum, motor movements and thought processes come together. Brief, quick thought processes precede all motor activity, setting goals, analyzing variables, predicting outcomes, and executing movement. Mental thought thus develops out of muscle movement. To pick up a water glass, I'm setting a goal. To reach this goal, I have to analyze the distance between my hand and the glass, and then decide how to move my hand. My eyes are continuously gathering information about these motor movements. Based on this feedback, I decide upon slight muscle adjustments that bring my hand precisely to my goal. All these mental and motor processes are happening along neural pathways that coalesce in the cerebellum. The neural pathways that coordinate and direct motor movements are the same neural pathways for thought processes, such as predicting, sequencing, timing, or even rehearsing a task. It should therefore come as no surprise that a motor movement like walking, which relates intimately to everything from the circulation of our blood to the flexing of our muscles, should exert a powerful influence over the neural patterns that shape our mental processes. The pattern of our motor movements becomes the pattern of our thoughts. We might even say that the movement of our feet becomes the movement of our minds. Although John's Gospel begins, "In the beginning was the Word," we might just as easily say, "In the beginning was the foot." Walking is how we move through space. Language is how we describe this experience. This relationship between physical movement and the mind explains why we have such a rich and nuanced vocabulary to describe how we walk. We ramble, amble, stroll, or stride. We meander and mosey. We roam and rove. We parade or promenade or plod. We even pace or trudge. When overly confident, we swagger. Under difficult conditions, we stumble along and stagger. We use descriptions of walking to represent people's emotions, outlooks on life, and personalities. We would never say that a shy person swaggered into the room or that a brave soldier meandered into battle. When we describe someone as creepy, we are not just describing how he or she walks. To call people sure-footed is to convey something about their personalities, and not just how they move physically. Our terminology of walking represents a reservoir of metaphors and analogies for human feelings and attitudes. We pepper our language with expressions about our feet. A good leader walks the talk. A poor one puts his foot in his mouth. We invite people to take a load off their feet. Dissatisfied church members vote with their feet and drop out. I dance with 2 left feet. When my father drove, he had a lead foot. I always try to put my best foot forward. Occasionally, I shoot myself in the foot. One of my friends usually lands on her feet, regardless of her mistakes. Another acquaintance often gets off on the wrong foot with a new supervisor. Observations about our feet are not simply literal physical descriptions of how we walk. As human beings, we have a foot-focused vocabulary. This vocabulary serves as the framework through which we perceive our world and communicate with one another. We can even trace the modern English word for learning back to the experience of walking. Its Proto-Indo-European root is lace, which means track or furrow. To learn is quite literally to follow a track or to walk a path. We learn on the soles of our feet. If the movement of our feet shapes the movement of our thoughts and emotions, then it certainly affects our spiritual lives. If our physical bodies atrophy when deprived of physical movement, then just as surely our spirits atrophy when we cease to walk with God. Walking as a spiritual practice is more than a pleasant walk through the countryside or a way to stay physically fit. It influences how we interpret and experience God's presence in our lives and our world, just as Christian worship encompasses many opportunities to take to our feet. Christian scripture frequently describes knowing or loving God in terms of walking a particular path or way. Our foot-focused vocabulary has profoundly influenced the development of biblical poetry, prophecy, and prayer. As Psalm 25 prays, "To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. The Lord instructs sinners in the way and teaches the humble his way. All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness. In Genesis, God walks in the garden in the cool of the evening, looking for the companionship of the first man and the first woman. The children of Israel eat the Passover meal as they prepare to walk from slavery to freedom. They carry walking sticks in their hands and wear sandals on their feet. Nestled within the book of Psalms, we find a small collection of songs of ascent, or pilgrim psalms. Psalms 120 to 134 represent a compilation of songs that pilgrims sang as they walked to Jerusalem for the celebration of the temple festivals. These psalms reveal how walking became prayer for the children of Israel. Happy is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways, chants Psalm 128:1. In the New Testament, Paul, who traveled mostly by foot on his missionary journeys, frequently describes Christian discipleship as a path that we walk. Believers are to walk by the Spirit. We who are baptized walk in the newness of life. Disciples of Jesus are to walk by faith. The men and women of the Bible did not fly or ride. They walked. Their world was circumcised by how far their feet could carry them. When I calculate how long a walk will take me, I estimate that I can walk about 3 miles per hour, which is the historical average. A day's journey on foot over rocky, unpaved roads in ancient Israel fell between 16 and 23 miles per day. The English word journey derives from the French word jour, or day. A journey originally signified the distance a person could travel by foot in one jour, or a single day. The Bible's authors lived in a 3-mile-per-hour world defined by feet rather than wheels or wings. Their world was much smaller, but they knew it more intimately. When I walk, I notice the squirrels in the trees and flattened grass where a rabbit has passed. I encounter smells, textures, and sounds that otherwise I would not notice. I sense more deeply my connection to the natural world around me. When I drive, I see only a blur of people and objects fleeing and vanishing. Pieces of landscape flash before my eyes in swift succession. The faster I move, the less I experience. Speed deadens my senses. As modern women and men, we move from one interior space to another. We leave the interior of our homes and enter the interior of our cars. We step out of the car and go inside an office, mall, or shop. Clocks and convenience govern the seamless movement from one interior space to another. Consequently, we never really inhabit an outside. Enclosed within cocoons of our own making, we easily make ourselves the center of our own private worlds. We never experience ourselves as part of a larger world that moves to creation's own rhythms. We lose touch, not just with creation, but with its creator. Walking slows our pace. The spiritual practice of walking reminds us that we live from God, who is the center of all things, rather than at the center of a self-contained private world. Walking invites us into a deeply physical knowing of the world and opens us to profound intimacy with God. The spiritual practice of walking patterns muscles and mind to discern the elusive traces of God in our world and in our lives. One aspect of Christian spirituality comes in discovering a mindful awareness of God in the immediacy of the present moment. The spiritual practice of walking nurtures this receptivity to God's presence in the here and now. We do not have to walk through a nature preserve to experience this divine presence. One day in 1958, Trappist monk Thomas Merton was in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. He sat down on a bench at the corner of 4th and Walnut and observed the people walking around him. In that moment, at that busy intersection, Merton experienced an epiphany. He realized that all the people walking around him were not separate from him, but were one with him, and he was one with them. It felt that he had awakened from a dream of separateness. Walking as a spiritual practice results in a different quality of thought. Henry David Thoreau wrote that when his feet began to move, his thoughts began to flow. The Greek philosopher Diogenes supposedly said, "Solvitur ambulando. It is solved by walking. Walking helps us make connections. We can all remember at least one time when, frustrated by a seemingly insoluble problem, we took a walk to clear our heads. And as we walked, the solution came to us. What are some implications of this relationship between muscles and mind for walking as a spiritual practice? First, while we sometimes go for a walk with no specific destination in mind, most of the time we have a specific goal in mind when we set out. We are going from point A to point B. When we walk, then, we make physical connections between one place and another. In the same way, walking helps us make mental connections with ideas, feelings, hopes, or memories. Walking as a spiritual practice likewise helps us make connections between ourselves and God. Walking helps us recover the soul's hidden wholeness. It knits back together the fragmented and sometimes broken parts of the world, of the soul. We do not have to think about walking. For most of us, our bodies mastered how to walk when we were toddlers. The point of walking is that we do not have to think about it. We just do it. Freed from the necessity of conscious thought, we can become mindfully present to that web of connections in which our lives are held in this present moment. These moments allow us to forge new mental connections. Walking as a spiritual practice moves us beyond our conscious minds so that we rediscover our many connections to God and to God's world. Second, walking means traveling light. When I go for a long-distance walk, I never want more than 20 pounds in my backpack. A well-seasoned walker once taught me what he called the 20-80 rule. Carry no more than 20 pounds with you, even if it means taking only 80% of what you need. In the same way, walking as a spiritual practice means traveling light. If we feel burdened by too many fears, too much guilt and shame, or too many oughts and shoulds, then we are unlikely to progress spiritually. Walking with Jesus means traveling light. Third, because walking shapes the neural pathways of the mind, it affects our sense of self. When our two sons were born, their feet were inked, and a nurse made imprints of their souls on their birth certificates. Their legal identity was forever linked to their feet. Could it be the proof of who we are as children of God is on our feet? One of my sons was born with a foot that turned inward. My wife and I feel blessed to live in a time when medical science could repair Jonathan's foot. We feel equally blessed to have access to healthcare resources that make such surgery possible. So a doctor surgically corrected Jonathan's tiny foot when he was 6 months old, and now that grown man has walked to more places than we could ever have imagined possible when we brought him home from the hospital. He has hiked along Neolithic trade routes in southern England and the Loire Valley. He has sauntered along the streets of cities around the world. He has marched to protest injustice. His strong steps have steadied elderly relatives as they shuffled from hospital beds to kitchen tables. His feet have carried him forward to receive the body and blood of Christ in his cupped hands. Where Jonathan's feet have carried him cannot be separated from the person he has become. If Jonathan had lived in a time when medical science could not repair his foot, his life and his sense of self would have differed greatly. His feet carry not only his physical weight, but also his story, and therefore his identity. Jonathan's feet are not merely physical appendages. They are an intimate part of a whole constellation of emotional, spiritual, and intellectual experiences that have shaped his personal and spiritual identity. Jonathan's experience is not unique. It holds true for everyone. Moving our souls sculpts our souls. Let us pray. God, we thank you for building our identity within our feet, that when we move through the everyday parts of life, that you move with us. God, we ask that we would make new neural connections to you as we walk from inward place to inward place. We ask that in the inward parts of ourselves, you would move and make yourself known. God, we ask all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. I'll see you all next week.